find myself in a lion's den as a beggar with an outstretched hand. I find myself in a western land asking for bread from dishonest men. I do not fear the lion's den. You'll be brought up to your father's land, and my cry is a longing of an ancient man to return to his promised land, going home again out of his lion's den.
The song you just heard is Lion's Den by Levi Robin. It is one of my answers to this week's self-care Q&A. Which figures from history inspire you and why? Gareth Jones, obviously, my imaginary boyfriend. Ulysses S. Grant, my other imaginary boyfriend. Eileen O'Shaughnessy, the Irish-English poet who was the wife and muse of George Orwell. She was more Orwell than Orwell. Where, Orwell is a young man. He was sort of hiding from himself. He went into the imperial police, famously in Burma, where Eileen was always very outspoken and lived by her convictions as a young woman, becoming one of the first women to graduate from Oxford. When she was in high school, she would give these speeches about how the pen is mightier than the sword, how we must not look away. So she always wore her heart on her sleeve. She always was always full of conviction, and she gave Orwell, who was deeply insecure, the confidence, the enthusiasm, the encouragement that he needed. And not only that, she was someone who studied child psychology, she studied literature, she went up against J.R.R. Tolkien as was her professor at Oxford. And she was just this great mind, this great poet, and this tenacious thinker in her own right. And she really shaped Orwell into the artist that he always longed to be. And their friends would comment on how his work transformed when she came into his life. Like, he met her, married her right away. He was a terrible husband to her. Terrible husband, cheated on her all the time, even with her own friends. And he basically leached her dry, was like a succubus, like draining her life force so he could absorb her powers for himself. Because she did everything. She managed the household. She lived on this primitive farm where she would clean out their outhouse herself. And he was indifferent to all of the suffering she went through and what a toll it took on her health. He really drained her. So I actually have a graphic novel coming out about this that I'm working on with the same publisher that did the dictatorship book with Gaslit Nation. So I'm really excited to share her story with a wider audience. I got the idea to do a story on Eileen when working on Mr. Jones, because George Orwell was a character in that film. So I had to get into Orwell's head. And in doing so, I was like, whoa, his wife is a badass. Why don't more people know about her? So Eileen O'Shaughnessy, extraordinary woman. And one of the reasons why I wanted to tell her story was because, it was 2020 in the pandemic. Again, we had that sinking feeling of do we have a future? How do we know if we have a future? Everything seems so uncertain. She went through that as well. She went through that, the lights going out inside of her. And she still struggled on and fought on. And with Orwell, she gets a lot of credit for bringing Animal Farm out into the world. Her descendants talked about how instrumental she was in the making of Animal Farm, Orwell's big breakout book that made him rich and famous for the first time, make worldwide big star, because that was his breakout hit, and it exists because of Eileen O'Shaughnessy. And she fought for that book. She fought for its existence, even at a time when she felt like there was no future. Oh, and by the way, before she met Orwell, she wrote a poem called 1984, The End of a Century. We're predicting all this doom and gloom with technology sucking our souls, but ways to resist it through art. Okay, so that's why she's one of my heroes, my mentors. And of course, Dorothy Thompson, the journalist who prepared the home front in the United States against the Nazis. I can go off and on about her, but I will say that for another time, because I just want to point out that in the work that I do, it can be incredibly lonely, it can be incredibly difficult. And, we're dealing with our own stuff in life. Like raising 2 kids is hard. Raising 2 kids during a time of encroaching fascism is extremely hard. Like raising 2 little girls at a time when their reproductive health care is being stripped away from them. Raising, children at a time when the climate crisis is finally hitting us like a slow-moving asteroid or like a fast riptide forest fire of an asteroid. It's very, very difficult to do this work. And so having historical mentors, having people who have been through it before, that has been extraordinarily grounding for me. And if you do not have a historical mentor, if you do not have somebody who helps you helps you breathe again, helps you sort of be grounded in all the work that we're doing, I highly, highly recommend it. And it's what's important to remember about our heroes, and what I love about my heroes is that they are human too. They are a big, wonderful mess too. They are human beings that walked before us and did exactly what we are now being called to do. That is why we need heroes. It's not to put someone on a pedestal. It's to remind you that you are human. You've every right to be scared. You've every right to think you cannot do this. Others that came before you felt the same way, but they did it. They rose up and they did it. And now it's your turn, and you can do it, and you will do it. And we're doing it together. All right. What's the best concert you've ever been to? Gogol Bordello in New York City. It was like a big, fat Ukrainian wedding jam band. Spearhead by Michael Franti at Coachella in the very early years of Coachella. Michael Franti, love him, love him. What songs are on your playlist to deal with these times? Levi Robin's Lion's Den. I love that song so much. Please listen to it. It is an anthem of where we find ourselves now. Who is a mentor who has helped you tremendously, and why? Nelson George, who was the writer of the hip hop movement. We interviewed him on the show. He came up, he was in Fort Greene, Brooklyn with Spike Lee and the Marsalis brothers and Lawrence Fishburne and a bunch of black artists in Brooklyn's Black Renaissance, like during the start of hip hop. And he was there. He was the writer of that movement. He invested in Spike Lee's first film, which literally launched the independent film industry. And they're still working together to this day. And Nelson George discovered Chris Rock, developed Chris Rock, and so on. And I just happened to meet him at a concert a million years ago. And he became the very first person in the industry of writing, of media, of the arts. He became the very first person who took me seriously as a writer. And that showed me how to take myself seriously. And that's not a small thing.
Find myself in a western trend. Here I am, back again, winding around this lonesome bend as a stranger in a foreign land, singing, do not fear the lion's den. You'll be brought up to your father's land, and my cries are longing of an ancient man to return